Ready, set, go, man, go. I got a gal that I love, so I'm ready. All right. What is going on, guys? Oh my God. First video back in 2023. Good to see you guys. It is Tom Radigan live, coming at you live, coming at you live. I said that 3 times already. All right. Let's move on. Beepity boop bop 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 back. Okay. All right. uh yeah, no, so this is my first video back in 2023. I know I did a video, about I did one little video this year about David Crosby passing, but I just deleted. I didn't like how it came out. I was very tired that day and very sick, but wanted to do a tribute, but just I felt like it didn't pan out well. But I'm back here, and as you see on the title of this video, I wanted to do a movie review about a documentary I saw that was released about Little Richard called I Am Everything. And I thought that was so cool that a documentary of Little Richard was coming out in theaters and all that. It was only a limited release, and I didn't get a chance to see it in theaters, but I bought the movie. I like usually I don't rent the movie. I just wait till it comes out on a streaming service because it might come out on HBO Max because I think it was produced by like Warner Media, or it said something about HBO Max presenting it. But I felt like, you know what, I just really want to see this movie so bad because like I've said this before, but it's really true though that whenever we see somebody talk about a 50s artist now, I think that's something that we really have to pay attention to because the 50s rock and roll pioneers do not get the credit they deserve. I mean, thank God, people still praise Elvis and talk about Elvis. And, with the Austin Butler movie, it's been helping getting more Elvis fans there. And that's great and that's wonderful. But we still aren't focusing that much on the actual other rock and roll pioneers that were just as important as Elvis. And one of them, of course, is Little Richard, who is the architect of rock and roll, or the real kid of rock and roll. And, this documentary I felt was so interesting because it focused on Little Richard in a different aspect than any other documentary about him or any other story about him, of him being, and what was so cool about it too was that it wasn't like outdated. It wasn't just focusing on him, famous in the 50s. It was basically the evolution of him throughout time. And one aspect they focused on was his persona, you know, what he brought to rock and roll. I mean, you had people like Mick Jagger and Tom Jones talking about just how, powerful Little Richard was to the performing arts and just of what he could do on stage with his hollering, with his piano playing, with his energy. I mean, oh my God, definitely. And the one thing about Little Richard that I think is very, very crucial to talk about is the point of view of how he perceived himself and how he perceived himself to the public. And it was interesting, really, knowing like there was a lot I learned. I think watching the documentary that I thought I already knew about Little Richard being a rock and roll buff and all that. I mean, there was certain stuff I sort of knew, kind of, but not like to the full extent. Like, for instance, it really focuses on him, on his sexuality, of him being gay, and even him, at times, um, denouncing, like, his homosexuality and all that, and being like, to show like a clip of him on Letterman, being like, Adam was made to be with Eve, not Steve, and it was just very interesting because, when we see, there's a lot of, flamboyant performers, and I guess I didn't know, and honestly, I was into Little Richard for like a few years until I found out that I heard that he was gay and all that, and I thought it was interesting because it was like, I guess that was just nothing that really came to mind, but I guess it's not a surprise when he put on such a flamboyant performance and was very, very flamboyant, and just had this very, just this interesting type of quality to him, um, with him performing, with like, especially like, how he looked in the 50s with the outfits that he had, but in the 70s, they were talking about how, his transformation into, like the mirror suits, all that type of fashion. But yeah, no, I mean, he wasn't different than any other gay performer like Liberace or a current performer, at the time of the 70s when he was doing these outfits like Elton John, but the problem with Little Richard, of what they focused on, is that he wasn't, even though he wasn't good at being a part of the gay community, as in speaking out and being an activist for it. And a lot of people in some ways felt he let the gay community down because he didn't focus on really embracing himself. He was like kind of being under a mask. I think because it was like there was a line in the documentary from a scholar there of saying that you know he was good at liberating people, but he wasn't good at liberating himself. And I think you can see that throughout the documentary and realize, and oh, like each phase he went through this different type of phase. In the 50s, he was the rock and roller. In the late 50s, early 60s, he becomes this preacher and he becomes very religious, and all that. And was already religious, but just becoming more of a preacher. And then he goes back to rock and roll, loving rock and roll again in the 60s, being in England. Like they show clips of him performing in England and doing these hell of these performances, where he's on the stage acting like he's dead and then coming back, doing songs like Whole Lot of Shaking, of course, the songs that he was known for, Ready Teddy. Talking about the time he performed, they were showing like, archival clips of, him talking about the time, he played with the Stones in England, how the Stones played with him, also how he met the Beatles when Billy Preston played organ for him. He talks about, Little Richard was praising how he got all these artists together. Jimi Hendrix was his guitar player. James Brown even sang for him, as he said, and Billy Preston played an organ for him. And also to, the Beatles, he introduced the Beatles to the Star Club in Germany, and all that as well, as the way he puts it, because Beatles, they played in Germany and Hamburg and all that, and then in '62 when they were getting bigger, they were playing the Star Club, which was like a big deal, and Little Richard was there, and of course there is that famous picture of them, that if you're a big Beatles fan, then you've definitely seen the picture of of the Beatles with Little Richard and all that, and in like the whole, I mean, what people talk about with the Beatles were that they wanted to fucking touch Little Richard, they were just that into him. They were just like, they just was like he was like a god to them, really, and yeah, and it's cool seeing, it was cool seeing that on the documentary, really just like kind of exploring the greatness of what he did to rock and roll, but I think also too of the struggled soul of him. And I think it's so interesting that, thank God, there are still people that are talking about these types of people, who are legends, and 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 I thought it was really interesting to put the documentary in a completely different lens of not just talk about the impact of of what he did with rock and roll, because that's already been said, but of how he was with the LGBT community, because that is such a current, I mean, not that it wasn't an issue to begin with, but it's become more public in media now, focusing on gay rights, trans rights, and all that. And having even like seeing people who I never heard of who were trans performers that were in the documentary, really talking about like kind of you know what Little Richard meant to them, and and all that. And I think also too, when you see a performer like Little Richard, then you can understand, oh yeah, that's how we got somebody like Prince, or that's how we got somebody like Michael Jackson, or even in current ways, like with Bruno Mars. Like for instance, when Little Richard died, I felt like nobody praised him. I felt like then I was really upset, these last few years of the last rock and rollers that we had that were still with us. And when they died, I felt like there was no big public memorial or tribute to them, just a little blurb about them, and then that was it. It wasn't like when Elvis died, or and stuff like that. And even like if a current, if an artist like like, it wasn't even David Bowie and Prince had like a bigger, like they were talking about those deaths for weeks, and Michael Jackson, but like Little Richard, we can't really talk for maybe about like more than like we can't talk about him for 6 hours. I mean, come on, like that's the thing that's crazy. I think because you know these artists did so much for rock and roll, and in some ways, I think there is discrimination, because I do feel like God forbid, because it's like I love Paul McCartney and Mick Jagger, but we know that when these artists go and when it's their time, there's going to be nothing but like talk about them for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and we can't get the same for people like Little Richard and Chuck Berry, and Fats Domino. you know? And I think that's sad because I think they just put they, they are just as important to rock and roll as Elvis was. And like I said, I love Elvis. I'm a huge Elvis fan, as you can see right here. The picture's a little dark right now, but yeah. But no, I love Elvis, but when people talk about like artists from the 50s, the only person they can freaking think of is Elvis. They can't like get it in their minds that there was somebody like a Little Richard or Chuck Berry, and they were just as influential because it's like Little Richard, of course, did Tutti Frutti, Long Tall Sally, and Elvis, covered his songs and also Rip It Up. And Little Richard said it. They showed the clip in the interview where he talks about how Elvis and Pat Boone sold more records of Tutti Frutti than he did. And the funny thing, I mean, of course, with Pat Boone was that, I mean, the Pat Boone, I mean, Elvis's version was good because Elvis, of course, the famous story with him was Elvis was a white guy that could sing black music, and that was the whole point. Gimmick is that if we can get a white guy sound like a black artist, then yeah, then that's gold mine. And then there was an idea of having a white guy singing rock and roll sounded like a white guy, and that was completely Pat Boone songs, and they are completely freaking white. Um, you know, and they're laughable, really, like the clean versions of Tutti Frutti, because Tutti Frutti already was, and Tutti Frutti is funny. It wasn't as dirty as it originally was supposed to be. And if you see the documentary, it'll say what it was supposed to be. And I'm not going to say the lyrics, but basically, it was about anal sex, basically. That was Little Richard's original idea for the lyrics. So they had to have a lyricist. Her name was, oh my God, let me say it right. It's Dorothy. Yeah, Dorothy Bottomy, I think, is it? Dorothy Bottomy, I think. Tutti Frutti. Let me see. Let me see. Dorothy Labastri, that's who it was, Dorothy Labastri, and yeah, she was the lyricist that cleaned up the lyrics to Little Richard's Tutti Frutti and all that. And of course, I mean, Tutti Frutti, oh my God, just a freaking rock, like kick-ass song, and with the womp bam baloo wop bam boom, and just his voice going through, just like all over it, along with like songs like Long Tall Sally. And that's another thing, of like, I mean, I remember when I first heard Little Richard, and being discovering all 50s artists will be stuff I'll never forget. But and I'll never forget the first time I really got into Little Richard and seeing the clips from the movie Don't Knock the Rock, where he's performing Tutti Frutti and Long Tall Sally. And oh my God, seeing that, because like the first time I ever heard of Little Richard was on Sesame Street, of him playing in the bathtub doing the Rubber Ducky song. So my first time really getting a chance to see who he really was, in that Don't Knock the Rock video that was on YouTube of the Alan Freed film, and seeing him way younger and looking completely different, and him doing on Tall Sally and Tutti Frutti and being like, this guy is awesome. And just then watching, as many videos I could find of him, him doing Lucille, which is another, I mean, Lucille is a killer song. I mean, I think honestly, like, I wouldn't be surprised if some people say Lucille is the best Little Richard song out there. I think Lucille might be like one of like my favorite. I mean, of course, I think the four best Little Richard songs of all time, I think and I think what people will agree would be like Tutti Frutti, Long Tall Sally, Good Golly Miss Molly, and Lucille, I think, are the holy grail. And then, of course, I mean, love songs like The Girl Can't Help It," which was used as a sample in the 2006 Fergie song, and all that. But you know, yeah, no, it's but like, and also too, he was in a movie with Jane Mansfield, The Girl Can't Help It. And like the songs that he had in that, it was like, it was like the first music video, seeing that those like, visualizing that stuff, and all that. And I thought, and exploring little, like I said, exploring Little Richard in the 50s was just freaking great for me and just freaking awesome, you know? And I just, like, I loved seeing this documentary because even though, like, it's been 12 years since I've been into this stuff. And, of course, time goes out where you're not as much into the 50s as maybe you once were and all that. And, and that's fine, of course, too. But, I think, I mean, God, I just, I loved, I loved, I just, I it was just great for me to see this documentary and see people still talk about Little Richard and it being in a different point of view, updating the type of story we can tell, I think is interesting too. I think the sad thing is, there was more a lot of archival footage and not a lot of new footage, but unfortunately, that's the problem when you have most of these artists from Little Richard's time that are dead. Like when you have videos of Lloyd Price. I mean, Lloyd Price died 2 years ago. Bo Diddley's been dead for years. And if you're going to want to include these artists, there's nothing you can use but archival footage. I mean, it did have some band members speak. I don't know if they were recent ones, but like recent footage, but there was some recent footage that was interesting of people who were still alive. But I thought it was an interesting documentary. I'm glad to see that people can still talk about Little Richard. Yeah, but so that's it for this review. I just wanted to bring that up, and I know it's been a while since I've been on YouTube. I have another video planned, and all that, and I do want to, of course, keep coming out with stuff. It's not, of course, the end, of course, but of course, it's I realize the videos are not steady too. Of course, busy with work and all that as well. I have a little bit of time on my hands. Because I've been and you have to make time with videos too, and I think that was the problem too. I've realized was that like it's been for a while. Been trying to think of like what I've been wanting to do on my channel and like what more music I want to talk about. And I have more ideas and all that, and but also too, just also I think the whole point of it is getting inspired as well. And it can be hard sometimes to really figure out what you want to do, what will motivate you. But yeah, no, I definitely will still be posting stuff in the future. So yeah, hit that thumbs up, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Thank you for not really anybody watching live, but that's okay. And have a good night. Bye. See you later.